You know, Jesus taught many interesting things that people don't seem to always get a grip on or understand. Jesus said many interesting things during his ministry on earth. We talked about that a little bit in Bible class this morning. Many times what he said was not just immediately clear, and so it took a bit of a struggle and some thinking and some wrestling with it to figure out what he meant. But he always had something, a nugget, you might say, that was worth understanding. In Matthew chapter 7, we have one of those situations. It was during the Sermon on the Mount, and he's talking along, and all of a sudden, after he's talked about praying and not worrying and storing up treasures in heaven and giving to the needy and fasting, he says, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged." Now, literally, that is what he says. The interesting thing is the prohibition that is at the beginning of it. In the Greek, there's a wonderful facility that allows you to look at the form of what is said, and you can tell what the expectation of the answer is, or the expectation of what he is saying, and you shouldn't or cannot do. So one of the special things Jesus teaches us is do not judge. We don't know whether that means that we have been judging or ought to quit, or if they might get started judging, or so don't do that, or that kind of thing. Well, this one here in the Greek is such that it says quit judging or quit being judges. So here he is addressing a behavior that he saw was common among the people. So he's saying that my prohibition is judge not, or don't be judging as you are doing now. And then he tells us you don't judge so that you won't be judged. Now, that is a prohibition and a promise, and I tell you what, take that prohibition. I will take that prohibition, to get that promise. He says, if I don't judge, then I won't be judged. Sounds awfully good to me. But is that what Jesus means here? That's the question. Is that what he is driving at? Is that what he wants us to understand? Or is that a thing that we're supposed to put into our lives and to have meaning in our lives? Well, the Bible makes many references about judging, talking about every kind of judgment. Yet here Jesus says, don't judge or quit judging. So the first thing that we want to see is that Jesus told people to judge. He said, I want you to go into all the world, you disciples. I want you to preach the gospel to every creature, and I want you to make disciples of them and baptize them. And when you go out and do that, here is what you're going to have to do. You are going to have to judge who already is a disciple and who isn't a disciple, who might be saved and who might not be saved. Have you ever had the experience of beginning to talk to someone about a Bible study, and as you get going in the study, you didn't know who they were or anything, you just met them, and all of a sudden they say, wait a minute, I've already done that, or I haven't done that, but I sure need to do that. Well, okay, that's good. Jesus said, I've come to seek and save the lost, Luke 10:19, and that is the point and purpose of my ministry, to seek and save the lost. Now, how are you going to seek the lost if you don't know who is lost? You have to make a judgment. Pure and simple, you are going to have to judge. When you read that what Jesus said in Matthew 22, where he was talking to the people who came to put him on the spot, they said to him, saying, should we pay tribute to Caesar or not? Jesus said to them, give me a coin. And so they handed him a coin. Jesus took the coin, he looked at it, and he asked them, whose image and subscription is on this coin? And they said, well, Caesar, of course. And he says, okay, well then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. So here's my question. How are we going to do that? and render obedience to the higher powers and pay your taxes and give them what is due them if you don't make a judgment of what belongs to the government and what belongs to God. You have to make a judgment. Again, this involves that judging process. So the Apostle Paul taught a similar thing on this topic. 1 Corinthians 5 is one place where Paul teaches this, and also in 2 Thessalonians is another. And both of these texts are teaching the same message. Paul writes by inspiration. He says, brother, you have a brother there in Corinth that is living such an immoral life, such a horrific life, that even the Gentiles don't live like that. And this guy's in the church. But the Gentiles would be repulsed at the behavior of this man. I'm telling you that you must put that man out from amongst you, put him aside. I want you to try your best to make him come to his senses and to come to repentance. I want you to evaluate him because I have already judged him. What? Paul was judging? Didn't Jesus say not to judge? No, not really. Paul, you can't do that. That's what people were saying to Paul. He said, you're judging this guy. And people say that to us every day. They say, you can't judge me. Well, Paul judged him, and we too have to do this kind of judging in the Lord's church. This same Paul that judged this man says in the same passage of Scripture in 1 Corinthians 5:12, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you who you and I are, we are to judge in the church. If I understand that right, I believe, and I believe I do, we are told, even commanded by Paul through inspiration, that we are to judge each other in the church, making judgment calls based on facts. We'll get to how that process works in a minute. But looking at Jesus, we see that he made judgments all the time. He says in the very same text in Matthew 7, when you see a prophet, when you hear a prophet, you judge him whether he is true or false. By their fruits you will know them. Marshall Keeble, an old preacher, gospel preacher down south, probably some of you have heard of him, he used to say, I don't intend to judge people, but the Lord did make me an inspector, a fruit inspector. Jesus commanded that we be fruit inspectors. So all of us look at other people's lives and we draw some kind of evaluation, some kind of judgment based on their lives. But I have come to learn that even if people don't know any other verse in the Bible, one verse that absolutely everyone knows is Matthew 7, verse 1. Don't judge unless you be judged. And everyone can quote that. You can't judge me. And when you start to close in and say, now, that is what God says, and that is what he wants and wants people to do, they kind of puff themselves up a full size or two bigger, and they say to you, wait a minute, doesn't the Bible say don't judge? Doesn't it say judge not lest you be judged? And you say yes, and they say, well, see there, leave me alone. Don't judge me. A girl was kicked off a Southwestern Airlines way back in 2007 because someone judged her unfit to be traveling on the airplane. Well, actually, not someone, but the whole airplane full of people, because she was causing trouble. Somehow today, though, if we say something good or something that others agree with, then you aren't judging. Have you ever run into this? You say something that people agree with, they don't think you're judging, even though you're making a judgment. But if you say something that they view as bad or ugly, then all of a sudden you're judging them. The truth of the matter is that you are judging whether someone else agrees with you or not. You are judging whether you say something good about the person or bad about the person. You're still making a judgment. But is that what Jesus is talking about here in Matthew 7? There are so many ways the Bible calls for us to have discernment and judgment and evaluation. And this here cannot mean that. It just cannot. Jesus couldn't say on one hand, don't judge, and then on the other hand, tell us to judge. That would be hypocritical. Now let's take a look at this passage again. For with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged, and with what measure you use, it will be measured to you. He is saying it is not judgment, but it is the kind of judgment. And he is describing a type of how we judge. Well, what is the type of judgment? What is he talking about? Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye while you have a plank sticking out of your own eye? Someone asked about Jesus, did he use humor in his ministry? And some say, no way. Others say, if you read some of the bizarre analogies that Jesus makes, they're pretty funny sometimes. And I think Jesus has a sense of humor. Imagine this. Here is a guy walking around with this 2x12 sticking out of his eye, and his vision is totally blocked in this one eye, and he finds a fella, and he has a wee little teeny little speck of sawdust in his eye, and he says, here, let me help you get that speck out of your eye. If you were the one with the speck in your eye, you'd be running, wouldn't you? I mean, you wouldn't want that guy to touch you with that 10-foot 2x12. Here he is trying to take the speck out of the other man's eye with a huge plank in his own eye. Wouldn't you laugh at that? You just did. It's funny. It's a funny analogy. That is about the dumbest thing that I've ever seen. You can't get close enough to a person to see the speck in their eye, let alone dig the speck out of their eye if you got this plank sticking out of yours. I read a story about Stevie Wonder and Tiger Woods sitting down together to have a bite to eat and have a coffee. And Tiger asked Stevie, he said, do you play golf? He said, I do. And he said, but most people don't believe me, so I don't play much. So Tiger asked him, he said, would you like to play around? And Stevie said, yeah, I'd love to. He said, do you want to put some money on it? And Tiger goes, well, I guess I'm kind of rich. It wouldn't matter. So Stevie says, okay. He says, I'll play a round of golf with you. And Tiger goes, but you're blind. How are you going to do that? And how come you're going to bet? And he says, listen, $10,000 a hole. And Tiger said, okay, we'll do that. He said, when do you want to play? And Stevie said, let's play at midnight tonight. Stevie Wonder played in the dark all of the time. And so for him, it was no big deal. But Tiger probably had a couple of nervous moments there, I would say. For someone to say, for my doctor to come walking into the room with a plank sticking out of his eye and say, hey, how you doing, David? Let me see what I can do for you. I'd be like, no, thank you. Send your intern or whatever they are. You got a problem there. You wouldn't put up with that, right? So that is what Jesus is saying here. You see the speck in your brother's eye while you're ignoring the plank in yours. You know what that tells me? It tells me that this is a person who is hypocritical of everyone. That's who Jesus is talking about. This is what Jesus is saying here. Have you ever noticed that some people just see something wrong with everything that happens? With everyone, what everyone says, what everyone does, just everything. There's something wrong. Things are too cold, or they're too hot, or things are too far or too close, and not funny or too humorous, and all of these things. And you never see this better than when we start looking about the church, or at least in some churches. You start comparing singing, prayers, sermons, classes, anything, you name it. There's always a comparison. And so 10 people get together, and I guarantee you they'll have so many opinions about it, and some will be irate about it. They will find the tiniest thing and they will say, I don't like that, Not everyone likes everything. But only those who are hypocritical make such a fuss about it that things get all crazy and out of hand. Jesus said, if you are hypocritical, that is the kind of judgment you shouldn't be doing. If you are absolutely in every situation looking to see everything wrong and you are thinking it is your job to keep your eye on everything and keep it straight, that is the way you're going to be judged. I heard a story about a young preacher who started his preaching career in a certain church, and one night after he had preached, the mother of a preacher who attended there came up to him and said how wrong he was about something he had said, and then gave him her opinion on how it should have been said. She started to leave, but then she turned around, she said to him, it is my job in the church to keep the young preacher straight. He replied to her, that is a terrible job, an impossible job with me. And it would be hard because the young preachers make a lot of mistakes and say some things they don't always intend to say. I've been there, I've done that. And people come up and they say, you said this. And I said, oops, I didn't mean that, I meant this, right? And sometimes you do make a mistake. But if you go around being hypocritical, Jesus says that is the judging I want you to stop doing, because of that. If you see every little speck in other people's eyes or wrong things in their life, you got a number of faults yourself. And so all of those are going to be judged in the same way you're judging. He doesn't want us to be that way. But there's a second thing, a second part of this. Not only does this person see every little speck in his eye, in his brother's eye, but he doesn't see or notice or neglects the plank in his own eye. Jesus labels this judgment by saying, you hypocrites. You see the tiny speck in his eye and you don't see the plank that's sticking out of your eye. He called them hypocrites. Have you ever noticed that the people who go after certain things, that usually their criticism is autobiographical? You know why? It is a lot about themselves, really, when all's said and done. It is because they judge everybody by how they think their problem is, and they think everybody else has that problem also. They see the problem they have so clearly in other people, but don't see in themselves, and that is what Jesus says is wrong about this whole thing. If you see everybody else's problem and you don't see or recognize your own problem, that is hypocritical. You are play acting. You are not as good as you think you are. You are simply wasting your time being hypocritical, and that ought not to be done. You ought to stop doing that. If you would straighten out your own life, then you will see clearly how to help other people instead of critique them to be better in their life. But if you don't straighten out your own life, you are not really qualified to help other people or to judge them. If reincarnation was real and true, and it isn't, but if it was, if we were to come back to this earth in another form, I am thinking I would come back as a church critic, because I can get caught up in that if I'm not careful. I have tried it on this side of the fence, and it's a lot easier to be a critic than an encourager. So we have to change that. We have to work on changing that and become encouragers instead of critics. We don't have to point out everything that's wrong. We don't have to point out every mistake. What we need to do is encourage people so those things aren't made anymore. Somehow, whatever this passage is speaking about, it could be God's judgment on us, because in Matthew 6:14 and 15, he says, you must forgive, or you will not be forgiven by your Father in heaven. So I'm not exactly sure, but there is an eternal application and implication here. I believe in the case of Matthew 7:1, though that this passage is talking about brother to brother, person to person, the kind of person that you are is what Jesus is talking about. Now you need to ask yourself a question. When you're in a group of people and you're in a group of people and everyone turns critical, do you join the crowd or say something positive? Most people don't have the nerve to say something positive amongst their friends when they are negative. Did you know that? It's hard. It's easy to get sucked into the critical. If you don't believe that, listen to yourself in the next gathering or discussion or two that you're having. That is the thing that Jesus is talking about. The Pharisees and the Jews, in many cases, were just like that. You think about how they treated Jesus. Someone would come up and say a little critique on Jesus or something critical about Jesus, and the next thing you know, they had a mob. Because that's how people are. But Jesus says you don't want to be that way. Jesus wants us to have the ability to see clearly what our own faults are first, or the ability to see clearly and judge when you've kind of cleaned up your life, to say, what is there that I can do to make this situation better? What can I do to straighten this out rather than to add to the critique and make it worse? But instead, Jesus says, if you are one of those critical ones, don't you worry about that. You're staggering around blindly with all these faults and trying to help someone with a speck in their eye, and you'll be judged with that same judgment. Not that the person is sinless or not guilty, it just means there is something wrong inside that needs to be taken care of. Jesus says, don't do that. Don't be that kind of person. Hypocritical judgment is not becoming to anyone. It is not the life that I have designed and have in mind for you. This is Jesus' way of telling people in the Sermon on the Mount, this is how you ought to live, and I will tell you that that is true today, as true today as it was when Jesus said it over 2,000 years ago. We need to become the kind of people who look at things remedially, how we can help, what we can do. See, a brother may be doing something wrong or terrible job, but we should be saying, what can I do to help rather than to criticize? That's what Jesus is talking about. That's what I'm talking about. This is the way that God's children ought to behave. So Jesus tells us how to live, but it doesn't always come naturally. He tells us to be a disciple that doesn't always come naturally, but that the kind of people we are, we make the claim that we follow Jesus Christ. We make the claim that we live by the Bible. We make the claim that we listen to every word, and we tailor our lives to fit that word. And then we go on living the way we always have, and the way we always did, and the way we were going to be, and don't give it much thought anymore. Too many things going on in eyes and ears from the world, distracting us of our goal in Jesus Christ. Jesus said, I am talking to you, to all of you, to all of us. Do this. Be the kind of person, be not the kind of person that judges or is hypocritical in judging. Be the kind of person that is like my servants, my children. Behave and act amongst each other or even those of the world. This is not striving to be the image of my son when you're being hypocritical. You need to change. And I can say this is exactly what happens both here and in the hereafter. God doesn't change or go back on his promises. This morning, if you want to have a good day at the judgment bar of God, Jesus said, you need to come. You need to follow me. You need to do what I'm doing. You need to act the way I'm acting. You need to care the way I'm caring. And you need to walk with me and do that every day and eventually join me in heaven. So you can do that right now this morning while we stand and sing.